Hello and welcome to the Inspire Online Book Club. We're going to be looking at The Sparsholt Affair by Alan Hollinghurst, and I'm delighted to be joined by four fellow panellists. There's my colleague Michelle Dunstan from Inspire, and then we welcome Terri, Kiddy, John Rogers and Matilda Holroyd. So welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. Alan Hollinghurst won the 2004 Booker Prize with The Line of Beauty. He's won lots and lots of other prizes as well. He's acknowledged as a very fine literary novelist and stylist, and is also one of the foremost writers about gay relationships, cultures and subcultures, both historical and contemporary. The Sparsholt Affair, the Sparsholts in the title are a family, it's a family name. And young David Sparsholt catches the eye of many a fellow student at Oxford in 1939, where he very briefly studies before joining the RAF. He has a liaison with a male student there, a very brief liaison. And then we move forward and he's married with a son, Johnny. And the book really then follows Johnny's progress as a young man, initially coming to terms with his own homosexuality and starting relationships, making friendships, making art, which is a very important part of the book. The book does go between different points of view. It can be quite confusing. I found it quite confusing in that respect, but it follows an essential chronological arc where the Sparshults are at the centre of the story. So I don't know who wants to start. I want to start talking about the language of the book, because I think if it's a Hollinghurst novel, it's really hard to avoid looking at that very dense, very rich language, which I very much enjoyed. John, have you got anything to say about the language of the book?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, he's one of these authors that's always going to use really glittering prose, and I think particularly in the first section of the story, because it's split into 5 parts, and the first section, with the war years and with the blackouts, etc. at night, that kind of is really good as a sort of contrast to some of the language that's being used, so that the darkness, but sort of the beauty of the language there. So I did, as always, you've got to take a couple of examples down, haven't you? And the things like the brief, dislocated intimacies of such an evening, you know, where we kind of get these little glimpses of something special that's lurking behind the darkness. So yeah, he does that very, very well. Yeah,
I agree. Matilda, what was your broad response to the novel?
Well, I think that his writing style is very, very descriptive. Like that seems the whole way through the novel. It's not mainly about there being lots of plot holes or like having to try and work out what's going on. It's quite a easy plot to follow, but the language is the bit that you kind of get slightly drawn into because of how descriptive he is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Michelle, I was just going to say about follow on from Matilda, like, you know, the style and the writing, it is absolutely beautiful. And I know that, I mean, it is the first Hollinghurst that I've read, and it's been on, you know, it's won the Booker, etc. But the way that it's written, the beautiful sentences, and you hear a lot in the reviews and stuff talking about that. But what is lovely, what Matilda says, it is still easy to read because he is just so good writing these characters and writing these stories. So I really enjoyed it.
I think he's got quite. I mean, I've failed to write something down this time, but it's because there were too many sentences where I'd get to the end of them and then smile, because there's a lot of wit entwined in them as well. Some of it can be a little bit, you get the feeling there's a reference being made to something that you don't know about, but not in a kind of exclusive way. It's just that clearly he has a great deal of knowledge, and also sometimes it's a sense of a very acerbic character who's being a little bit. Saying something about another character, but there are actually 2 or 3 different potential meanings in it. So he does that. His characters speak sometimes the same way he does, with that very overlayered and potentially everything's at a slight angle. You're aware that it doesn't all just. You don't just read it all on the page simply. There are lots of little allusions and lots of little references I found that made my brain spark off into maybe he means this, maybe he means that, which I really enjoyed, but did mean you had to concentrate all the time when you were reading it. So although it's not a difficult read, as you say, Michelle, I think it's because it takes you through it and it takes you into its own world. really, I felt quite deeply involved in it.
Because I think that's it. Some of the art.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet's a little bit wobbly at the minute. Because when he makes a lot of references to the art in there, I didn't get some of those nuances. I wasn't aware of some of that. But for me, that didn't matter. It was interesting, it was on the page, but it didn't make me feel excluded from the novel at all.
No.
You know, I still felt very involved in the characters.
Yeah, definitely. Terri, what about you? What was your initial response, or your overall response after having read it?
Well, I enjoyed it. But I felt that I suppose I was looking for something with more passion, and I was rather surprised that despite the rich language and the portrayal of the, his vivid portrayal of the different characters, that the actual subject matter of homosexuality and what goes on behind closed doors, as it were, I think it was rather a tardy view at times, and I found that a little disappointing. But this is my first, I suppose, real adventure into this genre. So if I was wider read, I may have come out with a different impression there. But I did enjoy reading the book, and it did, skip about a little bit. And so at times it was rather disjointed. But I found myself comparing it to Forster's Morris, where the passion is much more overt.
Yes,
it's much more tangible for me.
Yeah.
So maybe I should read more of Hollinghurst.
Well, yes. Well, I've started off. I'm now halfway through the Line of Beauty. I had read a previous one. I'd read, is it the Swimming Pool Library? But I found, and I want to explore further. I think it's interesting. I was doing some reading about him, and Morris and Forster was one of the things that one of his particular studies that he did when he was studying English that Hollinghurst was very interested in. So I wonder if Forster was at the back of his mind as well as yours, but perhaps he chose to take a different tack. I thought that particularly the character Johnny, it's almost like he didn't quite believe that he deserved love and happiness. There was something a little bit transactional about some of his liaisons, and some of his the way that he approached life was always as if there was something not quite right. And I thought it was interesting that because obviously his father was not out as a homosexual in any way. We'd perhaps call him bisexual. I mean, part of the Sparsholt Affair in the title is a big scandal involving his father. But Johnny, you'd think that being in a more contemporary society where there was a bit more tolerance and a bit more understanding would have no problems at all in life. But that's not true. I think he still feels somehow a little bit guarded, a little bit wary. Did anyone else feel that about the character of Johnny?
I wonder if that was partly because he was almost living beneath the shadow of his father's affair with a politician and so on. So, growing up with that is unimaginable, really. So I think that may have added to the fact that, that's the way that we've perceived him.
Yeah. Possibly. In terms of sympathies for the characters, I don't know, John, do you want to say anything about that? Did you like them, or was there a particular character or set of characters that you found you were more interested in or you warmed to?
I think they were interesting for different reasons. I mean, you've just been picking up on sort of like Johnny's portrayal, and I think they're all in search of something, aren't they? They all seem to be in some ways outsiders looking in. For different reasons, whether it be ever retelling his father's sort of stories and trying to create some meaning out of that, create some shape out of that, or whether it be Johnny trying to establish his life with, as Terri's just said, with this sort of shadow overhanging him. And I think the art that keeps creeping up is again like perhaps symbolic for. They're never able to get to really where they want to be. They're always sort of living their lives through some other form, perhaps, and aren't quite able to reach some sort of potential. So you sympathise with them to some extent because of that. But I don't know, again, but there is a real cast of characters in this novel, we should point out, I think. And I'm not always the best at tracking multiple characters, so I think I became disengaged with a few of them, particularly the periphery minor characters. But yeah, I do certainly feel that there's a search for belonging that we can sort of empathise with.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about sorry, Matilda.
No, that's okay.
Michelle, do you want to say your point first, and then we'll move to Matilda? Is that okay?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, John, that was a good point about how many characters there are in this. I kind of really like that, but I was the same as you. Some of those peripheral characters. Then because it's quite a circular novel in some ways, where you do revisit these characters later on, but then I would be like, oh, I can't remember who that is. But then I was trying to think about that, and it's funny that you've also said that. And I also wonder, because he is drawing out such a picture of these relationships and these lives over so much time, it's kind of like what happens in reality, isn't it? You have some very close friends that are very, they're centered in your life that you always remember, and then the peripheral ones that come in and out. And yeah, I thought that was it was quite a clever thing to do.
Thank you, Matilda.
Yeah, sure. I was kind of similar with the whole timeline thing. I had to, after I finished it, I had to make a timeline to make sure like where they overlap the characters, so that I didn't get confused halfway through. But I think it's quite interesting with David, because at the beginning, obviously, that it's setting the scene with all the characters that will feature later on. But it kind of shows the fact that in certain places in the UK even, there's more acceptance in different areas. So I think it was quite important that it was set somewhere that is considered quite conservative, in order to kind of set it as a larger theme. So because Johnny's whole life isn't in Oxford, it's kind of separating there being one place that is, say, for people can be more open, and I don't know, it was more that. And then I thought it was quite interesting how Johnny ended up being friends with all of David's university students. I don't know, I think that's where I got a bit confused. That was where the book slightly lost me.
I think it has that shadow again, as both Terri and John have mentioned. Even when he's in, he's actually helping. He starts as an assistant, doesn't he, in an art shop, and he's delivering a piece of art, and it's to someone who was so involved with his father in Oxford, and everyone knows his father, and so those are the people who knew David, the original Sparsholt Affair, which was that time in Oxford, and of course everybody in the entire country knows about the Sparsholt Affair with the politician. So everywhere he goes, he's sort of doomed to retrace the people. And I mean, both like Michelle and Matilda, when I was reading the characters and trying to work out who they would sometimes be people who had been peripheral to the first set of characters, but then we suddenly someone's marvelous sister, and it's all that very sort of very upper class characters who are all doing marvelous things and all down at Oxford, and it's very vibrantly relived that whole Oxford scene of pre-war. But then you'd go, oh, and that person is now actually a character, and I'm supposed to remember something about her that's significant. And I did find that slightly confusing. Terri, what about you? How did you follow the characters and the sense of the narrative in that respect?
I didn't really have any issue, but I did print out, before I started to read the book, a resume.
I'm very impressed by these people who organise themselves in that way. That's good.
So that helped to, fit me into the timeline, if you like. And I guess thinking of the timeline, we seem to be thrust in the final chapters into communication and, dating and so on via modern technology. I didn't see a gradual lead into that. And obviously at the beginning, that was pre 1967 Act,
yes,
which legalized homosexuality. So you have all of the almost the blackout blinds indicative of how these people, very unique people, actually had to manage their lives. So maybe that's another reon why Johnny is a little wary still, not just because of his father's history, but because of the stigma that many people sadly still experience in modern society.
I think that's true. I think also that period you're talking about, so it was a big transition from all of a sudden he's swiping left or whatever you're supposed to do, but there was also a large chunk of his life where he was in a happy relationship that we met the chap earlier on, and then we realized they were together, and then they're not. And it's obviously been years and years and years, but we haven't really seen Johnny then. And maybe it's that whole happiness writes white. And if Hollinghurst had been writing about that, there'd have been nothing dramatic to say because it was two men being very happy together. But it is that, but also that then takes up a chunk of time within the novel as well, where, as you say, that there are no kind of developments being talked about. It's another leap. Suddenly he's with somebody. Oh, and now he's on his own again and feeling bereft and bereaved. So I want so possibly the suddenness of that sort of internet dating is because we've left Johnny and then we've picked up with his character again later, which did seem to be a theme of the novel. Actually, it wasn't a complete continuity.
Yeah, I was gonna. Sorry, we seem to want to talk at the same time every time, don't we, Matilda?
Sorry.
No, I am. But yeah, no, because the novel does span such a massive expanse of time, but it leaves big gaps, doesn't it, between each of the sections that you've almost got to fill in yourself of what's been happening to those characters. And that's why, like you said, Terri, when you get to that end section, all of a sudden, we've stopped right from the beginning where everything is behind the blackout blinds. We get to the end and everything's, it's explicit and it's out there, but there's big gaps in between each of the sections. I mean, really, even when it comes to the Sparsholt Affair itself, that is only talked about in reflection, isn't it? There's a big chunk of time missing from the novel in that, but it's very interesting how it does. It kind of leaves it to the reader to fill in a bit of the story.
Yes, I think so. Matilda.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Terri said right at the beginning about the whole romance and how they kind of gloss over it, and the fact that entire, like, they're meant to have been together for 40 years and we get nothing. Like, there is absolutely no description, nothing. It's just they're together, they were married, they did this. And, like, that would have been a very good character development had they, say, had a few scenes on either them being married or how it was perceived, or, them having their gay friends around them. Like, there could have been a really good little bit in between that would have very nicely have gone, this was how it used to be, and this is here's the positive from it. It felt like it was showing the community, the gay community, to be almost still quite backwards. And I mean, considering that the author is gay, I thought he would be more into trying to promote some of the positives. I just thought that it was all quite negative, considering
it was almost like it was a stereotype, really. I think, which is what I think what Terri's saying, in that it did seem a kind of tawdry, just hook up, which is fine. I mean, we know that happens in every. That's not the conserve of homosexuality at all. But that was what he was focusing on, and that's what seemed to be offered to Johnny. And I think that's and what Johnny, he didn't really look outside that. So Yeah, it's strange. We all feel that it didn't really reflect well or make it. There wasn't a fantastic moment where you thought, oh, fantastic, brilliant. He doesn't need to hide away anymore. There was still, I think, this sense of shadows and this sense of being bound by something that is in some way holding him in.
Yeah, it's to do with David, right? Because him and his son are both dealing with the same thing. They're both gay, but in different generations, and instead of them bonding near the end, it kind of ended with being like, oh, and David, it wasn't, they didn't bond at the end. Like, there would have been a very nice way to kind of go, to know that, like, they had something in common and they just didn't talk about it at all.
His father would never acknowledge it. He married again, didn't he? And married a woman again. Yeah. So that was interesting. The whole father-son relationship obviously is explored, is really interesting. John, have you got any thoughts on that? Did anything strike you?
Well, I mean, obviously the importance of sexuality in this novel is crucial, but as well, I don't think we should overlook class and the kind of the class divide, because we've got essentially a brummie who, sort of working class brummie who becomes the talk of the town, and dealing with that expectation as well perhaps is something which I don't know, does that mirror up with sort of his repression and his David's repression and not being prepared to talk to his son more openly? I don't know, is it a kind of a more of a working class inhibition? I'm not sure it is, but I think that maybe is a theme that obviously falls on the back burner a little bit in this novel, but is potentially quite important as well. Yes,
he seemed relatively at ease in Oxford, largely because he was the object of such attention, because obviously he was a very handsome man and he was very ostentatiously working out with the rowing crew and so on. So as a young man, he seemed more at ease with himself then, really, oddly. But then obviously didn't. Perhaps he was finding himself, and then he just closed his ears to it and thought, right, well, I've said I'm going to marry, so I'm going to marry. I'm going to put all that behind me, and obviously then couldn't. But again, that's another chunk of the novel. We don't see those internal struggles, but we know he wanted a son. That's what he's actually told people, that he hardly knows. Oh, I want to get married and I want a son. So he, it's an ambition, and he's decided to fulfill it, even if that's at the expense of his own happiness or his own the integrity of his life, really.
It's the same with Johnny, right? Because they both had.
Sorry, Matilda, your screen froze a bit.
Not true. They had. Sorry. How Johnny, basically one of his very close friends, he ended up having a child, but not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Because the mum was, gay as well as him, and it was that thing of how basically David Sparsholt had a kid, even though he was closeted or in some way, and then you had Johnny, who was very open, but still also had a child. I don't know, it was quite a, like, as you said, circular. It went back to the whole, it's all to do with family, right? That's what the book's about.
The parallel.
Yeah, family and found family as well, among those friends. I know we've said that a lot of Johnny's friends ended up being the friends his father had, but there was a big sense of family and found family. It doesn't necessarily have to be blood. And yeah.
Which brings me to one more point, the female characters. I wonder if, Terri, did anything strike you about the way that the female characters are dealt with? I mean, they tended to be slightly peripheral. Even the mother, I thought that was possibly quite an interesting take on it.
I thought it was interesting that the females were introduced into the novel, and for me that they seemed to be feeling much more comfortable about the fact that they were in a lesbian relationship, and from the outset, we want to have a child. So we need a guy to help us to do that. So they seem much more comfortable with it all. And I didn't have a sense of any shame, but I think there is a lot of underlying shame, and that possibly affected the relationship with Johnny and his father, because as a child, he would have grown up. He would almost breathed in that shame, wouldn't he? So I think there is that underlying shame and guilt as well. But for me, I think the female characters were much more at home with it all, as it were.
Yeah, they did seem just very socially at ease with it as well, weren't they? As a contrast to Johnny. Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with Terri, because I mean it is those two female characters that introduced Johnny to his first gay club, and it's them that put the idea of having a child. But then I did think it was interesting when Johnny comes to do their portrait, he does note, doesn't he, that you don't see images of like a female couple in the same way in art that you see the male couples. And so that was it was a bit of a contrast there, which I thought was interesting.
Maybe they're just benefiting from that Victorian notion that actually Queen Victoria didn't believe that women could get up to anything together, and therefore they were never part of the law. There were never any laws against lesbian relationships, because it simply couldn't happen. So possibly there is less in terms of legislation and in terms of public vilification. Homosexual men have suffered publicly much more. I'm quite sure that within lesbian communities, they still receive a lot of hate from intolerant people. But the high-profile cases and the people that have been vilified most publicly have been men, gay men, really. Matilda.
I was just thinking about how, where you were saying about the first thing being in a gay club. The reality is that Johnny actually had his first relationship when he was with his, at the holiday place, the Lookout, and how actually he was in his first relationship on that holiday. But they were also on holiday with the person of who his dad had the affair with.
Yes, that was very strange.
It was like later on, and you were like, oh, they mentioned it earlier. Oh, they mentioned the person that he was with, and it was just how it kind of overlapped, and how they still weren't close, even though that had they'd been there together doing the same thing.
Yeah, they were mirrors. They were mirrors, weren't they? Yeah. Reflecting off each other, but not actually then forming that bond. I'm aware of the time.
The ending, didn't they? They had the ending with the new person that Johnny had met.
Yes.
And how he was kind of this next generation who was then doing the whole online dating, and how they were bringing that in. And I thought it was quite interesting how they were just going down the generation. And Johnny had kind of been in all of it. He was the bit that brought it all together.
Yes, he was in that generation which actually spanned those decades. I'm aware of the time. I think we're going to need to call an end to the conversation, even though I'm sure we could all say much more. So in general, would you recommend the book? I'll ask each of you in turn. John?
Yeah, I would say it's a difficult one with Hollinghurst. If you've read any of Hollinghurst, he might be the kind of sort of one novel author in a way, whereby he does keep building on things that he knows well. But this is probably more of a departure in form from him. It's probably more ambitious than he would even normally choose it that way, artistically. So it's good fun to play with, and I'd recommend it from that point of view.
Lovely, thank you. Matilda, what about you? Would you recommend it to other readers?
I mean, I liked it. I wouldn't. I haven't read any of his other books, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. I haven't really read any book similar to it. I just wouldn't. I liked it, but I don't have anything to compare it to.
Sure. So, remember, it'll be the first of many, maybe. Terri, what about you?
Well, as Matilda was saying, I haven't read any similar books. But yes, I certainly recommend it. I'm prompted to read more of his work so that I can get a real feel of the author.
Yeah, me too, actually. Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, definitely. I would recommend it. And I would say, because I had thought about reading Hollinghurst before, but you do hear a lot, because he is, the booker, an intelligent writer, but and maybe that not put me off a little bit, but made me a little bit wary of starting. But its essence, I love this book. I'm going to read more, because it's about family, it's about love, it's about the passage of time, and on that itself, I would definitely recommend it.
Brilliant. So that's all. And I would second those comments. I think I would certainly recommend the book. I think any keen reader would find much to enjoy, at the same time as finding all sorts of questions, but they're the best books, aren't they? If they leave us having more questions than we feel we've had answers. I think that's quite healthy. So many thanks to my guests, to Terri, John, Matilda and Michelle. If you've got any comments about this book once you've read it, then feel free to send them in to us and to get engaged in the chat. And if you see this recording and you're interested in getting involved in the Inspire Online Book Club, check it out at inspireculture.org.uk and you'll find out details of how to join up. Meanwhile, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the chat, and goodbye for now.